In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about what is a mobility workout, the physiology behind it, because there are some maybe examples out there which aren't as complete as they could be. And there's many different examples. Some are just stretching, some are just moving joints. But what we're going to do is look at the underpinning physiology of it and biomechanics of it and try and understand what a mobility workout really is. If you're struggling with your joint mobility and you want to improve it and you're in the UK, click the link below, go through to my How to Improve Mobility workshop page and come and join me at the gym for 2 hours where we can improve your mobility and set you up with a program to continue that further into the future. First of all, we have to make a couple of distinctions. So the first one is the distinction between mobility and flexibility. So mobility is the range of movement at a joint. So you can see here, you've got to have range of movement at the ankle, at the knee, at the hip, and in some respects at the thoracic spine as well. Whereas flexibility is how long a muscle can become. So it's slightly different because obviously here, if we're looking at the hip, we're talking about multiple muscles. So we're not really talking about specific muscles. We're talking about the joint as a whole and all the muscles that make that up. What we then have when we talk about flexibility, we're talking about specific muscles. So having long muscles doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have good mobility at the joint because there are multiple muscles. So as you can see here, you've got a stretch here for glute medius, glute minimus around sort of the outside of the hip here. But just having these muscles flexible doesn't mean that you'll be able to get down into a full squat because there are other muscles at play, so as adductor group, so on and so forth, rectus femoris, things like that. So what we've got to be able to do is get all of those muscles long. So as it says here, the aim of a mobility workout is to increase mobility of a joint, not just make muscles more flexible. This means adding a biomechanical aspect to it. So there has to be some degree of biomechanics or movement involved in a mobility workout, and we're going to discuss and understand what that is and how we go about getting it. And step one of how we go about getting it is some sort of massage. Now that can be self-massage, that could be foam rolling, that could be getting a massage from someone else. But basically, if we've got tightness around a joint, again, we've got to understand the specific muscles, but we can't just focus on making the muscles more flexible. We've got to have the understanding of, is it making the joint more, or is it adding range of movement to the joint, not just making the muscle more flexible. For some people, it's hard to differentiate mobility and flexibility, but we've got to think about the result, not about the muscles. The muscles are the means to the end. The mobility is the end that we have in mind. So we've got to, in some respects, not worry too much about the muscles and focus more on the whole mobility. But we've got to, certainly from my perspective as a professional, I've got to have the understanding of the muscles involved and how we can work with them individually, but not just to make them more flexible, but to make the whole joint more or have greater range of movement, if that makes sense. So we start the process with massage, because if we've got a stiff muscle, we've got to unstiffen it. We've got to make it, as it says down here, we've got to make it more flexible, more supple. We've got to relax it, which helps with the suppleness. It also helps realign muscle fibers. If there's tightness within there could be an old injury that's in there that's misaligning some fibers. We can work those out. That again is all going to go towards relaxing the muscle and building the suppleness in it so we can increase the range of movement around that joint. It reduces the activity of mechanosensitive receptors. So there are certain receptors within the muscle that will respond to length and shortness that we need to override, and we'll talk about that later on. And then increases the microcirculation. So when we have tightness in a joint, so what you can see here myofibrils. This here will be a muscle fiber as a whole, and then what makes that muscle fiber up are these myofibrils. So you can see one poking out here, and then you've got all the different myofibrils here that make up the muscle fiber. Now what can happen is these are the bits that lengthen, so they get further apart. So these little sarcomeres, so they get further apart and they get closer together. So these can essentially get stuck together and create tightness. What they can also do, these muscle fibers, so what we have is then more muscle fibers above, more muscle fibers below, more muscle fibers alongside of, and they can get sort of tangled up, if you will, and create some sort of knot. So what the massage is then doing is releasing all of that and creating a more relaxed, more supple muscle that is able to move. What we then just need to do is teach the muscle to move, which is what we're going to talk about in the next two steps. And the second one is muscle elongation. And what we've got to overcome is the stretch reflex. And essentially we get a 20-minute window for that. So what we've done is we've massaged the muscle and we've relaxed it. Now, with regards to the receptors within the muscle, we've got these things called muscle spindles, and they essentially wrap around muscle fibers. So if you can imagine a spring, so the coil of a spring, and then you sort of turn it on its end and you can look right down it. That's where the muscle fiber goes. So as you open out the spring, that's the muscle getting longer, or the muscle fiber getting longer. But as you squash the spring together, that's the muscle fiber shortening, or the sarcomeres getting closer together. Now, because it's a stretch reflex, if you stretch too quickly or too far, it's going to want to ping it back, just like a spring would. If you pull a spring apart and let go of it, it's going to spring back. That's essentially what the stretch reflex is. So when we go into stretches, we've got to go in, we've got to hold those stretches, because what we're doing, we're essentially teaching the muscle spindles, which are sort of an unconscious reflex. We are, in some respects, consciously teaching them that they can get longer and not to have that reflex at the original length. So we want to take it beyond that, and then basically we're saying to the muscle, you can go further than you once could. Because we've massaged it out, because we've made it more supple, we've given it the ability to do that. Then we elongate it and we start bringing in this stretch reflex and these muscle spindles. We take it further than it was originally before, which is beginning to teach the muscle that it can go further than originally before. So once we've done that, what we've then got is we've got then a 20-minute window, roughly, where we're able to use that new range of movement. What will then start happening is it will start to sort of close back towards where it came from. So it'll close back in towards its original length. That'll obviously take a bit longer, but with regards to a window that we have to use, let's just say 20 minutes, because when it comes to stretching, that's generally what is said. We have a 20-minute or 20 to 30-minute window. So essentially, this mobility workout, first of all, there's got to be some degree of massage to allow the muscle to elongate. Then we've got to elongate it to overcome this stretch reflex. And then we move on to the final stage, which is some sort of exercise, which will then give the neurological stimulus of using that range of movement. So you can see me here, I'm down in a squat. So let's just say it is my hips that I'm trying to increase the range of movement of. And let's just say previously I could only get down sort of to that angle. But as you can see now, I'm down at a much tighter angle. So what I've done is just quickly mention what exercise does. So muscles stimulate at new length. So as I've talked about with the massage and the stretching, we're just trying to get it to that new length. What we then do with the exercise, or with sort of specific exercises, depending on the mobility that's required, we then need to stimulate it at that new length. So we need to essentially use it. And what we're doing is we're loading it, so we're giving it more neurological stimulus because of that load. We're not overloading it, because again, that will create a reaction in and of itself, because we have these other things, or receptors in the tendons called Golgi tendon organs, which respond to the load going through, or the force going through the muscle. So if we overload it, they'll kick in and it'll create a reflex. So we need to be able to sort of overcome these two unconscious receptors that are kicking in, but we're doing it in a logical way, and using massage, stretching, and essentially movement or exercise to do that. Then we get a reduction of muscle guarding. So that is essentially, if you've had a previous injury, your muscles will guard against the problem happening again. So I always use the example of a twisted ankle. So we create a limp, muscles get tight to protect the joint. What then happens when the let's just say the pain has gone, the swelling has gone, and we're able to walk again, for example, there will be some sort of residual tightness around the ankle protecting it subconsciously. That's muscle guarding. So again, we need to overcome that if there's been a previous injury. So again, with regards to the workshop, that's something that we cover early on in the consultation. Has there been an injury there? Is that playing a part in the restricted mobility? Or is it just muscle tightness for muscle tightness' sake? Then motor control is improved. So what we're doing is we're using the joint, we're coordinating the joint, so it then just becomes improved motor control, which again gets installed in the brain, and then in some respects it goes from a sort of an unconscious awareness of movement to a conscious awareness of movement, which will override the unconscious eventually if we practice enough, if we don't stimulate the receptors enough. So when it comes to mobility, we've got to cover these 3 stages of massage, stretching, and then movement or exercise. So to quickly summarise what we've talked about, essentially, what is a mobility workout? It's a workout that aims to improve the mobility of a joint, or the range of movement of a joint. We've got to move away from specific muscles, although we've got to have the understanding of the specific muscles around the joint so we know what to do. But we've got to focus on the end result. So we aren't focused on the means, we're focused on the end. So whatever we try, it's got to be measured by, has it improved the mobility of the joint? So a lot of people will stretch tight hamstrings. That can be unnecessary for the very simple reason is it might not increase the mobility of the joint. So we've got to think about it, the joint as a whole, rather than just specific muscles of the joint. Then we've got to employ the 3 stages, which is massage, which is about making the muscle relax, become more supple. Then we can start stretching, which is going to slowly overcome the stretch reflex, which is not allowing it to go further. So we then take it further and essentially are saying to our body, you can go further. Then we use that 20-minute window of that extra elongation to use it with exercise. So we teach the brain and stimulate the joint and the muscles within the joint to say to them, you can go further, and this is where I want to take it. And we can use specific exercises for that, depending on have you had an injury or whatever, or the exercise that you want to improve the mobility for. So we have to understand it in that regard. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial. If you found this content useful, please do click the like button below. It will help with the algorithm and keep the video up. If you like this and want to learn more, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, and you'll be notified when I release my next one. And then if you've got a comment or a question about anything that I've covered in this tutorial, please just leave it down in the description and I'll do my best to get it answered as quickly as possible.